I sprinted down the stairs with one shoe untied, and my laptop bag slapping against my side like a hyperactive child, only to stop dead in my tracks when I saw it. Right there in my parking spot number 27, the spot I paid extra for, the spot I defended like a gladiator for 2 years straight, was a shiny white SUV, perfectly polished and offensively smug, sitting like it owned the place. My jaw dropped. I stared at it like it was a crime scene. It had floral decals on the windows, a personalized plate that read "Blessed One," and a pink air freshener shaped like a yoga mat dangling proudly from the rearview mirror. It was the kind of car that looked like it judged you for eating carbs. I blinked, hoping it was just a sleep-deprived hallucination. It wasn't. My morning was already a disaster. I'd overslept, spilled coffee on my shirt, and had a make-or-break investor call in 40 minutes. Now this SUV had officially made itself my arch-nemesis. I whipped out my phone and called the building manager. No answer. I texted. No reply. I checked the guest parking logs online. No entry for that vehicle. I walked around the SUV 3 times like some weird ritual, hoping to find a note, maybe a "sorry," scribbled on napkin paper. Nothing. I even peeked inside. The owner had left a yoga mat, reusable bags, and a copy of some book about manifesting positive energy. Irony wasn't just alive, it was thriving. There was no one in sight. It was early Monday morning, the time when no one wants to interact with anyone and everyone is in survival mode. And yet here I was in combat mode with a mystery SUV that decided to colonize my territory. I had no time to fight. I parked 3 blocks down, jogged back, and joined my Zoom pitch 3 minutes late with my hair clinging to my forehead and my Wi-Fi cutting out every time I tried to share my screen. My boss messaged me mid-call saying "we'll talk later," which was corporate for "this is not good." When the call ended and my shirt had fully glued to my back with sweat, I slammed my laptop shut and muttered a string of curses that probably made the neighbor's dog blush. I didn't even know who I was angrier at, the person who parked there or the HOA for creating a system that couldn't even tow a clearly parked out-of-bounds vehicle without 15 forms, 2 witnesses, and a blood oath. By the time evening rolled around, I went back to check, and the SUV was still there like it had been installed by the manufacturer. I waited in the lobby with a view of the spot, hoping to catch whoever owned it. Nothing. 10 p.m. came. Nothing. Midnight. Still there. The next day, same thing. And the day after. At this point, it wasn't just annoying, it was psychological warfare. I started leaving polite notes: "Please move your car, this is a reserved space, nothing aggressive, nothing nasty." They all disappeared by morning like a magic trick. On Wednesday I saw a faint smudge on the windshield where I'd left a sticky note. Whoever this was either blind, bold, or just plain evil. Then Thursday happened. I was returning from a grocery run, arms full, keys in teeth bags slicing into my fingers, when I saw her. Blonde ponytail bouncing, yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a Bluetooth headset glued to her face like she was closing Wall Street deals. She waved goodbye to someone at the end of the drive and marched confidently straight to the SUV. My blood froze. I dropped one of the grocery bags, eggs nearly cracking on the sidewalk, and sprinted up. "Excuse me," I called out, panting. "Is this your car?" She turned with the grace of a theater diva mid-curtain call. "Oh yes, sorry, I've been meaning to move it," she said, like she was talking about leaving a cup on the counter, not hijacking someone's paid parking for nearly a week. I tried to keep my voice civil, even though I was one frayed nerve away from screaming into the void. "This is my reserved spot, I've been leaving notes, and reaching out to the HOA. "Oh," she said, her eyes scanning me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "I thought no one was using it. It's so close to the building, I figured it was free." "You figured," I repeated, slowly feeling my pulse throb behind my eyes. "It's labeled 27. There's a sign. My name is on the lease." "Yeah, but you know how these things are, it's just a parking spot, right?" She gave a tight smile and walked off, swinging her bag over her shoulder like she'd just delivered a TED Talk on entitlement. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake imagining scenarios where I towed her car with a helicopter or filled her exhaust pipe with glitter. I even considered painting my spot neon green with a biohazard sign. But the next morning her SUV was still there, smirking at me, taunting me, like it knew I couldn't do anything. I called the HOA again. They said they'd look into it. They also said I needed photographic proof of her actually parking in it. What was I supposed to do? Install a wildlife camera? On Friday I started taking photos from my window. Time-stamped, high-quality, daily proof. Karen, and yes, by now I had named her Karen, was using my space as her personal spa valet. Saturday morning I caught her doing stretches behind the car. In my parking spot. I almost choked on my coffee. I confronted her again and she gave me a new excuse. Apparently she hurt her foot and needed to be close to the building. I asked her if that was before or after the yoga stretches she did while giggling into her Bluetooth headset. She didn't respond. Just waved me off with a fake limp and disappeared into her unit. I felt like I was in a sitcom directed by a sadistic producer. But something changed that evening. As I walked past her SUV again, I noticed something different. The passenger window was slightly down. And sitting right there inside was a duplicate key. Just lying there exposed. Like a piece of forbidden fruit hanging within arm's reach. I stared at it. My brain buzzed. This wasn't temptation. This was a sign. Not to steal it or vandalize it, no. I was better than that. But it did plant the seed of something far more creative. Something poetic. Something engineered. I'm not just some angry guy with a grudge. I'm a mechanical engineer. My workshop has tools that could build a small tank if needed. And as I stood there in the fading light of the evening, the gears in my head started turning. Literally. She wanted to play this game. Fine. But I was going to write the rules now. And Chapter 1 was about to end with the soft click of a chain locking in place. The next morning I stood in my workshop, sipping burnt coffee and staring at a mess of chains, clamps, carabiners, and a whiteboard that looked like it belonged to a mad scientist instead of a mechanical engineer with a clean record. I wasn't going to damage her car. That wasn't the plan. This wasn't about revenge. This was about balance. About restoring the sacred order of Spot 27 and making sure that for once, Karen learned that other people's space wasn't her personal playground. I needed something big, dramatic, but non-destructive. Something that would echo in the HOA's ears and replay in Karen's mind every time she saw a parking line. So I decided to do what I did best. Build something they couldn't ignore. Over the next 2 days, every spare moment outside work hours was dedicated to construction. My garage turned into a Frankenstein lab of steel. I worked like a man possessed, measuring anchor points, calculating load limits, and creating a modular, fully removable chain grid designed to wrap a car like a present. I had motion sensors. I had an old industrial winch. I even designed a magnetic lock system that required a key fob coded with my phone. The idea wasn't to hurt her vehicle. The idea was to make it completely unusable without my permission. And above all, it had to be reversible. If the HOA came knocking, I needed to prove I hadn't damaged anything. I even wrote a script to automate a log of timestamps and footage for legal proof if things got ugly. On Sunday morning I did a final test run on my own car. It worked perfectly. It took just under 15 minutes to fully encase the vehicle in crisscrossed steel chain and anchor it to a hidden wedge under the tire. Then another 5 minutes to release it cleanly. I could do this. I was ready. Karen's SUV sat in my spot again, taunting me like an uninvited guest who eats all the snacks and leaves muddy footprints on the couch. She was getting bolder too. There was now a sunshade in her windshield with a quote that read positive vibes only. It was like being mocked by a Pinterest board. I took one last deep breath, loaded the gear into my friend Amir's van, and we waited until nightfall. At around 2 a.m., with the apartment complex in complete silence, Amir and I crept into the lot like two oddly specific burglars. He held the flashlight and double-checked for security patrols while I rolled out the chain reels. We worked fast, years of shared college projects making our coordination perfect. First came the base ring around the tires, then the vertical loops around the doors, carefully avoiding any scratching. The lock grid clicked into place with a satisfying clink, and we finished by wrapping a giant orange netting ribbon across the hood with a laminated tag that read "Surprise for those who take what isn't theirs." From start to finish it took us exactly 17 minutes. We high-fived without a word and vanished into the building. Monday morning came with a chorus of chaos. I was in my window by 6:45, sipping my coffee and waiting. At 7:15 the front door of Building 2 burst open and there she was, ponytail swinging, reusable mug in hand, and a purse that could probably house a small horse. She walked toward the SUV with her usual confidence, and then stopped so suddenly she nearly dropped her drink. Her arms flailed. She took a few steps back, then forward again. Then back again. It was like watching someone try to reason with a force of nature. Her voice pierced the stillness of the lot. "What the hell is this? Are you serious? Is this some kind of joke?" she shouted into the air, as if the universe owed her an explanation. I could see her try to pull at the chains. She tugged at one, then another. The magnetic locks held tight. She whipped out her phone and started snapping pictures, pacing in circles like a lion in a cage. Within minutes she was on a call, pacing faster, voice louder. I heard snippets from my open window. "Vandalism, yes, still here. Can't believe. I don't even know his name." That part made me laugh. She'd parked in my spot for a week straight, ignored my notes, ignored me, and now she didn't even know who she'd messed with. By 8 o'clock, the HOA president himself waddled into the parking lot with a clipboard and a face that screamed, "This is not what I signed up for." Karen descended on him like a Category 5 storm. She pointed, shouted, gestured wildly. He tried to stay calm, asked her questions. She kept repeating, "It's just a parking spot," as if that explained everything. Eventually he knocked on my door. I opened it fully dressed, sipping my second cup of coffee like it was just another Monday. "Mr. Leo," he said, clearing his throat, "there's been a situation. Did you happen to wrap someone's vehicle in steel chains last night?" I nodded. "I did." He blinked. "May I ask why?" I showed him the pictures on my phone. Every day she'd parked there. Every note I left. The video clip from Wednesday where she said she thought the spot was free. The email thread with the HOA. His eyes grew wider by the second. I said I just wanted to make sure she couldn't leave without a conversation. "And don't worry, nothing is damaged. I designed the system myself." He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Karen appeared in the hallway moments later with her arms crossed and rage bubbling out of her eyes. "This is insane," she barked. "You can't just trap people's cars. You can't just steal people's property," I said calmly. "That spot costs me an extra $80 a month. You used it for a week without asking. This was me getting your attention." She scoffed, turned to the HOA guy and demanded that they call the police. They did. The officers arrived about 30 minutes later. They looked over the setup, asked questions. I walked them through everything. Showed them how the chains caused no damage. That it was a security device. That the car had been parked illegally on private property assigned specifically to me. That the vehicle's owner had ignored notes and verbal warnings. One of the officers chuckled. "This is the most secure parking job I've ever seen," he said. Karen was livid. She accused me of harassment, of stalking, of public humiliation. But she had no leg to stand on. In the end, the officers said it was a civil dispute and no crime had occurred. They recommended Karen take the issue up with the HOA. I offered to remove the chains, but only if she signed a written agreement acknowledging the space as mine and agreeing never to park there again. She refused. Said she wouldn't sign anything under duress. So I handed her a card with my number and said, "When you're ready to stop treating people like doormats, you know where to find me." She stormed off and I locked the system again, walking back upstairs as if I'd just left a courtroom victorious. The story spread like wildfire through the complex. Neighbors texted me laughing emojis. One person left a Starbucks gift card on my doormat. A retired man from Unit 4B gave me a nod of respect in the hallway. Even the building's dog walker said she'd been waiting for someone to put Karen in her place. I didn't say much. I let the chain speak for itself. Because sometimes silence wrapped in steel says more than words ever could. And Karen wasn't just hearing it. She was living in it. It had been about a week since I removed the chains and restored Karen's SUV to its natural, entitled state. I hadn't seen her since. Not her car, not her face, not even the shadow of her pastel sneakers. It was like she'd vanished into the HOA's drywall. I figured she was either licking her wounds in silence or concocting some wild counterattack in a room lined with scented candles and inspirational quote. I tried to let it go. I really did. My mornings returned to peace. My coffee didn't taste bitter with rage. I got to use my own parking spot without feeling like I was trespassing on my own money. But the silence didn't last. It never does with people like her. Entitlement doesn't sleep. It reloads. Late Friday night, I received a new letter from the HOA slipped under my door. It was stamped urgent in red, as if I was smuggling explosives instead of just existing peacefully in my apartment. The contents were laughable, if not infuriating. The board had officially reopened their investigation and had voted to issue a formal violation against me for unauthorized installation of mechanical locking systems on communal property. They claimed a majority vote had passed in favor of the fine and requested I pay within 10 business days. This time there was no suspension or review. This time it was direct and condescending, complete with a line about how community harmony depends on measured conduct. I called the number listed on the letter the next morning. After waiting on hold for 20 minutes listening to instrumental jazz that made me question my sanity, I finally reached Denise, the HOA secretary who always sounded like she was in the middle of a very dramatic soap opera. She said the decision was final. No appeal process. No negotiation. I asked who voted. She listed 3 names. One of them was Karen. I asked how someone involved in the incident could vote on a case about herself. Denise paused, then said she was acting as a neutral board member when casting her vote. I hung up before I said something that would get me banned from all neighborhood potlucks forever. It was clear to me now this wasn't about chains or property lines anymore. This was about control. Karen hadn't gone quiet. She'd gone strategic. She'd taken the embarrassment and the loss and redirected it like a corporate spin doctor. She had wormed her way back into the HOA's good graces, probably with sugar-free brownies and passive-aggressive comments about people who take things too far. But I wasn't going to let her win this one. Not by rules she'd twisted herself. So I did what any self-respecting engineer with a mild obsession for fairness would do. I went back to my files, back to my logs, back to the receipt. Over the next 2 days I assembled a folder so thick it could double as a weapon. Every HOA bylaw, every parking guideline, every email they had ignored, every message I had sent. I printed out the community map with annotations showing which spots were marked reserved, which ones were open, and which ones Karen had previously occupied without permission. I even highlighted the building's own maintenance requests where she had illegally hosted a birthday party in the common area without permit. The woman had a record. It wasn't criminal, but it was definitely chronic. But the true jewel in my arsenal was something unexpected. One of the neighbors, an older man named Jerry who barely spoke a word during board meetings, approached me in the laundry room one morning. He said quietly that he used to be the HOA president of another complex before he moved here. And Karen, he revealed, had lived there too. I nearly dropped my detergent. According to Jerry, she had done the same things. Claimed spaces that weren't hers. Argued with neighbors. Filed constant petty complaints until she wore down the system and got what she wanted. Eventually she was removed from their board after 3 families banded together and filed an official misconduct petition. He even had some documentation from the old complex that referenced her. That's when I knew I had more than a counterattack. I had a pattern, and patterns matter, especially when people are pretending to be victims while quietly playing chess behind the scenes. I drafted a new letter, formal but loaded with enough evidence to make it uncomfortable to ignore. I requested a board hearing with all current HOA members present and included Jerry's account, copies of the old neighborhood's notices, and all my recent interactions. I sent the letter by email, certified mail, and even hand-delivered a copy to the HOA office Dropbox. No more backroom decisions. If Karen wanted a war of procedure, she was going to get it. They scheduled the hearing for Thursday. It was to be held in the community room, the same beige-colored chamber where people usually argued about dog poop and holiday decorations. This time it had more eyes than usual. News had spread. More residents had started digging up their own encounters with Karen. A young couple who had once been fined for their kids drawing chalk on the sidewalk. A veteran who said Karen once accused him of faking a disability to get better parking. The woman had been quietly terrorizing the complex under the cover of HOA politeness, and the spell was starting to break. When I entered the room that evening, it was already half full. Karen sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, hair pulled tight, lips pursed like she was on trial for a reality TV drama. The board members shuffled their papers nervously as I walked to the front and placed my stack of documents on the table like I was about to teach a college course titled How Not to Abuse Power. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I walked them through the timeline, the footage, the records, the calls, the inaction, the retaliation. I ended with a single sentence. You let one person twist the rules for personal convenience, and now you're punishing someone for defending what he was paying for. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Jerry spoke. He confirmed everything. Quietly, calmly. A second board member, who had previously avoided eye contact with me, raised his hand and said he hadn't even been shown all the material before being asked to vote. Another resident stood up and said if Leo gets fined for this, then you better find the lady who parks her RV next to the fire lane every summer. A few people laughed, but the message was serious. Karen tried to speak then, finally, but her words were shaky. She called the whole thing an overreaction, claimed it was about community standards, and not letting neighbors take the law into their own hands. But by then, it was clear her influence was eroding. She was no longer the voice of order. She was the symbol of every ignored complaint and every double standard. The board didn't vote that night. They said they needed to review everything properly and would release their decision by the weekend. But I already knew. The tide had turned. And for once, it wasn't in Karen's favor. That night I walked past spot 27 with a small smirk on my face. No chains. No chaos. Just a simple, clean space, and a feeling that maybe this time the story wouldn't end with a shrug from the people in charge. Maybe, just maybe, accountability had finally made a guest appearance. The following morning felt different. There was a shift in the air like the calm before a storm, or maybe the quiet after a successful ambush. Karen's SUV sat perfectly still, wrapped tightly in the steel embrace I had engineered with both technical precision and deep, simmering irritation. There wasn't a scratch on her vehicle, no broken windows, no slashed tires. Just an elegantly secured cage of interlocking chains, magnetic anchors, and the crown jewel, the oversized orange construction net bow on the hood that flapped slightly in the breeze like a flag of poetic justice. I sat by my window with my coffee, watching from a distance like it was performance art. My phone buzzed every few minutes with new messages from neighbors sending clapping gifs, memes of Fort Knox comparisons, or just photos of the SUV from different angles. Someone even posted it to the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Steal Karen, now playing in parking lot 2. Around noon, Karen returned. This time she wasn't alone. 2 of her friends were with her, both dressed in pastel athleisure, like a yoga-themed jury coming to inspect a crime scene. They paced around the SUV, pointing, whispering, clearly trying to figure out how to remove the chains themselves. One of them pulled out her phone and Googled something. The other tried shaking a few of the cables but quickly gave up. Karen, in contrast, stood stiff with her arms crossed like she was preparing to sue the entire concept of physics. She spotted me standing at the window and shouted without hesitation, "You think this is funny?" I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee and slowly closed the curtains. Let the tension build. Let her simmer in the stew she cooked herself. An hour later, I received a knock on the door. It wasn't the HOA or the cops this time. It was the building's part-time maintenance guy, Alan, a soft-spoken man who avoided drama like it was airborne. He looked uncomfortable as he explained that Karen had requested the building remove the chains, and he was being asked to help. I asked him politely if he had permission to tamper with a private vehicle security device. He admitted he didn't. I thanked him and closed the door. Alan didn't touch the SUV. Karen didn't knock herself. Not yet. Later that evening, I received an official email from the HOA. Subject line: Formal complaint against resident. The body of the email was just as dramatic as I expected. Karen had filed a complaint accusing me of harassment, unlawful restraint of property, and creating a hostile atmosphere. The HOA, perhaps realizing they'd ignored a festering issue too long, decided to flex their weak muscles. The email stated that I had violated Rule 6.4.3a of the Community Guidelines, unauthorized mechanical modifications on shared premises, and that I would be issued a $500 fine and required to remove the chains immediately. I laughed out loud. Not because I was surprised, but because I had predicted it almost to the letter. I drafted a response that was the digital equivalent of a mic drop. I attached images of the SUV parked illegally for 6 consecutive days, screenshots of the timestamps from the security footage, records of the notes I had left, the HOA's own ignored emails, and a detailed breakdown of how my locking system was non-destructive, temporary, and used solely for self-protection after consistent negligence from the board. I CC'd the regional property manager and added one spicy little attachment. The bylaws section they had quoted, highlighted in yellow, alongside the clause directly beneath it that allowed residents to install temporary barriers on their paid and leased parking spots in the event of repeated unauthorized use. I didn't write a single threatening word. Just facts, dates, documents, and enough legal breadcrumbs to make their heads spin. I didn't hear back for 2 days. In those 2 days, Karen didn't approach me. She didn't touch the car. She just glared from a distance and continued telling anyone who'd listen that I was a dangerous maniac. But the neighborhood had shifted. I wasn't being treated like a villain. I was being treated like the guy who finally stood up to someone who'd been walking all over people for years. An older woman named Ruth from down the hall came to my door with banana bread. She said she'd had her garden chairs stolen once, and the HOA did nothing. Another guy from Building 3 sent me a message saying Karen once called security on his nephew for riding a scooter too fast in the hallway. The stories were flowing like floodgates had opened. Karen had been a quiet tyrant, and I had apparently become a local legend for daring to bind her SUV in steel. On the 3rd day, the HOA finally responded. The fine was being suspended pending further review. They thanked me for the detailed documentation. The tone had changed. Suddenly I was Mr. Leo instead of the resident in question. That same afternoon, I heard a knock on the door again. This time it was Karen. No friends, no phone in hand, just her, visibly uncomfortable, arms crossed but lacking her usual fire. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She stared at me like she was trying to decode whether I was human or demon. She didn't apologize. She didn't yell. She just said, "So what do you want? You've made your point. My car's been stuck for days." I nodded slowly and replied, "What I wanted was my space back and for you to stop pretending other people's rules don't apply to you." She scoffed, like she still couldn't believe I had dared to say no to her. I continued, If you're willing to acknowledge what you did and promise not to park in my spot again, I'll unlock it. No tricks, no public shaming, just a reset." She hesitated. For a full 30 seconds, she stood there like her pride and logic were in a wrestling match inside her head. Then she muttered something like "fine" and left. An hour later, she slid a folded note under my door. It was written in a mixture of sarcasm and performative humility. "I regret that I parked in your spot. I will not do it again. You have made your point. Congratulations." It wasn't much, but it was enough. I went down that evening, unlocked the chains, and carefully removed every cable, every anchor, every part of the structure. I wiped the SUV down, left no scratches, no residue. Just a single sticky note under the wiper blade that said "Welcome back to reality." The SUV was gone by morning. Not just from my spot but from the entire lot. I didn't see it again for a while. Word was she'd started parking down the street near the visitor lot. The HOA didn't bother me again. No fine. No lecture. And as for Spot 27, it remained untouched, respected, and deeply legendary. I didn't tell the story to everyone. I didn't brag. But I didn't need to. The chains had done all the talking. And from that moment on, no one dared test the patience of the guy with a mind sharp enough to build a trap and calm enough to wait for karma to walk right into it. Saturday morning arrived with an odd sense of suspense hanging over the building, like the air right before a thunderstorm. The HOA board had promised a final decision on the violation, and although they hadn't announced an exact time, everyone in the complex knew it was coming. People were unusually talkative in the hallways, hanging around mailboxes or pretending to water plants near the community room just to catch wind of the news. I had been calm all week, not because I trusted the HOA to be fair, but because I had taken every precaution to ensure this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about principle. Karen had been quiet since the hearing, noticeably absent from her usual routine of wandering around with her Bluetooth headset, pretending to run a company no one had ever seen evidence of. Either she was planning a last-minute comeback, or she was finally starting to understand what it felt like to lose control. Around noon, the email arrived. It was brief and almost clinical in tone. After reviewing the submitted materials and the testimony provided by all parties, the HOA board has voted to rescind the violation notice issued to Mr. Leo and formally recognize Spot 27 as his designated, leased space. The letter also included a note stating that no further unauthorized use of the spot would be tolerated, and future incidents would be subject to fines or towing at the violator's expense. There was no apology, no direct acknowledgement of Karen's manipulation, but it was a win. A solid, written win. I reread the email 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to let the weight of it settle in. It wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had built a castle out of indifference and assumed no one would ever question her authority. The news spread fast. I barely stepped out of my apartment before people started congratulating me. A woman from the 3rd floor offered to bake cookies in celebration. A teenage boy gave me a fist bump and said his mom called me the parking ninja. Even the old man from Unit 1A gave me a rare smile and said, "About damn time someone stood up to her." It was the kind of quiet neighborhood victory that didn't make the news but rippled through the community like a silent revolution. And as much as I appreciated the recognition, I knew that the real victory was how people had started to question the rules and the people who enforced them unfairly. Karen, however, didn't take it well. I didn't see her again until Sunday afternoon. I was walking toward my car, parked exactly where it belonged, when I spotted her standing near the mailboxes. She wasn't wearing her usual athletic gear or her power walk expression. She looked different. No headset, no sunglasses, just Karen, holding a manila envelope and glaring like she had swallowed a lemon. As I passed, she stepped into my path. "We need to talk," she said flatly. I stopped. For a moment I thought she might try to argue again, maybe accuse me of defamation or harassment or something equally unhinged. But instead, she handed me the envelope and said, "I wrote it out. For your records." Then she walked away without another word. I stood there for a few seconds before opening the envelope. Inside was a typed letter. It was only a page long. It didn't include the words sorry or apologize, but it did say this: "I acknowledge that I used your parking spot without permission and without attempting to find a solution. I understand that my actions caused frustration and that you responded within your right. I will not use your space again, and I agree to abide by the HOA's parking regulations moving forward." It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. But it was written. Signed. Dated. I folded it carefully and placed it in the glove box of my car. A small but significant piece of paper proving that entitlement had finally been cornered by accountability. A few days later, the HOA hosted an emergency meeting. Not about me, but about parking violations and the board's process for handling complaints. Apparently, my case had triggered an avalanche of residents coming forward with similar stories, not just about Karen, but about other issues the HOA had ignored or mishandled. What started as a war over a single parking spot had become a catalyst for community reform. They were drafting new policies for quicker dispute resolution, clearer reporting channels, and even proposing term limits for board members. And the kicker? Karen resigned from the board that very night. No fanfare. No announcement. Just a quiet, frustrated exit after realizing the power she once wielded had completely dissolved. After that, things finally settled. My parking spot remained untouched. The HOA stopped bothering me. Karen went back to being just another resident, no longer hovering above the rules but walking alongside the rest of us. Sometimes I saw her around the building, at the mailbox in the stairwell, but she no longer made eye contact. The defiance was gone, replaced with something that looked almost like introspection. Whether she'd changed or was simply waiting for her next opportunity, I didn't know. But I had made peace with it. She didn't have to become a better person for me to feel like I'd won. She just had to stop treating everyone else like they didn't matter. One morning, as a final touch, I installed a small camera overlooking Spot 27. Not because I expected future problems, but because I wanted a quiet reminder that some lines, once drawn, should never be crossed again. I also added a little sign to the front edge of the space, nothing dramatic or insulting, just a wooden plaque with carved letters that read, "Reserve. Respect is not optional." A few neighbors chuckled when they saw it. A couple nodded in agreement. No one touched it. Weeks passed, and the story faded into background noise. But every now and then I'd hear someone refer to it. The chain wrap incident, as they called it. It became a kind of local legend, told over barbecues and in late-night hallway chats. Some exaggerated it, saying I used military-grade chains or that Karen called the FBI, but most got the spirit right. It wasn't about aggression. It was about standing your ground when someone walks over it repeatedly and calls you dramatic for caring. One day, as I returned from work, I saw a new neighbor unloading boxes near the building entrance. She looked lost, balancing a stack of things while trying to figure out the parking situation. I helped her carry a few items and showed her around. She asked me if it was always this peaceful here. I smiled and said it wasn't. But it got better. She nodded, then pointed at Spot 27. "That's a nice sign," she said. "Someone must really love that space." I chuckled and replied, "Yeah. You could say that Spot's been through a lot." She laughed, not knowing the story behind it. And I realized, finally, that was the point. That spot didn't just belong to me anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been walked on, ignored, or told to sit down and be quiet. It was a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person to say no, and mean it. And if that message came wrapped in a few 100 pounds of steel chain, well, maybe that just made it a little harder to forget.